Mooring vessels is a routine day-to-day operation familiar to most crew members. But familiarity can breed contempt, and sometimes seemingly ordinary routine jobs don't get the full focus of attention they should, and there are accidents. Some of them very serious indeed. Let's show you what we mean. A crew member was casting a towing line off from a bollard on the forecastle deck. The line had been slackened enough for the eye to be freed, but just as he tried to lift it clear of the bollard, there was a sudden high swell which pushed the vessel astern, brought the tow line under tension again, and trapped the fingers of his left hand between the line and the bollard. The master reacted quickly and moved the vessel ahead. The line slackened and the man could pull his hand free. But he'd lost the nail from his middle finger, and 2 others were swollen. We need to learn from every such incident. This was a reminder that risk assessments must consider weather and sea conditions, and that it's essential always to use good seamanship techniques. Here, for example, the tension could have been taken off the line by a warping drum, or, if there's no drum available, by rope or chain stoppers. 2 vessels were maneuvering to transfer fuel oil from one to the other. The water was deep, so the transferring vessel, a platform support vessel, PSV, was in DP mode, and the receiving vessel, a line handling tug, was backing up for stern-to-stern mooring. At first, the 2 masters proposed different mooring formations, but eventually agreed to moor in crossed lines. As they were doing so, the line to the port quarter bollard of the supply vessel went slack and caught under the stern quarter. The AB and oiler on deck told the mate on the bridge what had happened. He told them to lean over the bulwark to see exactly what was wrong, but as they started to do so, the line went taut, sprung up the hull, over the bulwark, and hit them on the head, knocking them on the deck. They both got up immediately, but as they were walking back to the accommodation, one of them, obviously still dazed by the impact, fell again. The rig doctor on the nearby drill ship examined them, and luckily neither was seriously hurt. If they hadn't been wearing the correct PPE though, they could have been in real trouble. So, what caused the problem? Both vessels could have moored in parallel formation. This could have prevented the incident. Also, if the work had been prepared properly, there would have been a joint JSA, job safety analysis, and the correct mooring formation would have been agreed. Thorough risk management would have identified hazards, and the crew members wouldn't have been told to lean over the bulwark, and thus put themselves in the line of fire. More risks were created by the various jumbo bags which were strewn about the deck and restricted the available workspace. Ultimately, the masters didn't supervise or direct the work adequately. Equally though, none of those involved used their stop work authority. A hopper barge was moored on the port side of a crane barge with a spring and 2 winch wires. As the barge was being loaded, the winch wire crawled up along the bollard. A crew member, wanting to go from one vessel to the other, stepped over the wire. Just as he did so, the wire slipped over the bollard and hit his legs. He fell over but managed to grab hold of a railing and stop himself from falling between the 2 barges. Of course, it didn't help that as he was stepping across, he was also talking on his mobile. The lessons here are obvious. When vessels are moored alongside one another, moving from one to the other calls for our full attention. Crew members should not attempt to move between vessels before it is safe to do so and permission is given. There should be safe, properly marked walkways on deck. Winch wires must be led around one bollard, not 2, so that they're secure and can't slip over. On deck, we need to stay alert at all times, and that means never chatting on a mobile at any time whilst working on deck, and never standing in the loops of wires or ropes. A tug was mooring up to a single buoy mooring, SBM, on which a dive team needed to finish some routine maintenance work. Once the tug was in position, the chief officer realized that it needed to move some 15 meters closer so that the diver's umbilical could reach the buoy. The chief officer needed to put a stopper on the mooring line before securing the bits, but the configuration of the mooring equipment meant that he had to enter a snapback zone in order to do so. As he was about to start stoppering off the line, it slipped off the bit and hit him on the chest. He was pushed backwards and up and fell and banged his head on the deck. His injuries included a fractured skull. The vessel returned to port immediately, and he was taken to hospital. The main cause of the accident was that the mooring arrangement meant that work had to be carried out in the snapback zone. The design and organization of its equipment also made it easier for the line to move upwards. Once again, no one involved tried to stop the job. Whenever an operation deviates from an agreed plan, it should be stopped and discussed at a toolbox talk. There should be a management of change process. The next incident involves a service vessel on which a routine procedure was being used to move floating hoses away from an incoming tanker using soft pickup ropes. The deck crew and the bosun had picked up and secured the first rope, but were finding it difficult to secure the second one. The chief mate came down from the bridge and took over the job himself. With his arm through the eye of the rope, he was holding it close to the vessel's Panama eye. A sudden swell tightened it, and his right hand was caught against the hard edge of the eye. The force was so great that his hand was severed. This shows how even with a routine procedure, everyone involved needs to be vigilant all the time. The chief mate shouldn't have stepped down to perform a crew task without proper preparation. No one recognized that by doing so, and also by not handling mooring lines in the correct way, a new potential hazard had been introduced into the task. No one stopped the job, possibly because they were reluctant to challenge the authority of an officer. Our final example has a truly tragic outcome. Two vessels were maneuvering during mooring operations. One was moving towards the workplace using a mooring line and winch. The rigging was slackened, but as the angle between the two vessels became greater, the tension increased to such an extent that the chain snapped at the pad-eye connection and swung violently across the deck. It hit a deckhand with such force that he died of his injuries. Several factors contributed to this fatality. First, the deckhand moved into the path of the braking chain and so was in the line of fire. Next, the braking strain of the equipment had been underestimated. It couldn't cope with the load put on it. Finally, communication between the vessel masters, the winch operator and the deckhand was limited, and sight lines were poor. Once again, it was a routine task, and the incident stresses the need for constant vigilance, even when the task seems commonplace. Crewmen should always be aware of the possibility of danger from equipment failure, particularly with regard to ropes, towing and rigging equipment. Planning. Even the most routine procedures need careful planning and discussion between all those who will be involved. Risk assessments, controls and procedures, toolbox talks. They are all vital for the identification of possible hazards and how to eliminate, reduce, or mitigate them. Everyone needs to know who's in charge at each mooring station on deck, and members of the team must be able to see and hear them clearly. VHF, talkback systems, hand signals and verbal communication are part of normal communications. Language barriers may be a problem, so emergency signals and procedures need to be understood and well practiced by all. Personal protective equipment. Everyone must wear the correct PPE. If they don't, they shouldn't be allowed to be part of the team. The basic requirements are coveralls, safety boots, safety helmet, high visibility vest, gloves, safety glasses, and, for those working near the shipside or quayside, a buoyancy vest. Danger zones. Deck markings can help to identify snapback zones and potential pinch points, but everyone should look out for them. Common sense will help us to avoid most of them. And if you see a dangerous situation developing, signal for work to stop. Your view of the operation may be different from that of others. You may be the only one who can see it. Hazards. If you stand in the bight of a rope or in the line of fire, you're asking for trouble. Be careful not to step into the bight of a rope and be alert to the potential dangers of wires and ropes under tension. But it's not just ropes and chains under tension that may cause problems. Oil, ice, badly lit areas, shipside handrails, gratings, poor weather, rough seas, they can all introduce new hazards. Working with other vessels. Mooring often involves tugs and other small vessels. Once again, good communications are essential, and you should always be aware of how your actions may impact on crew on other ships. Vessels moor and cast off every day. It's such a familiar standard procedure that the temptation may be to treat it more lightly than other operations. The examples we've given, however, illustrate that it can never be taken for granted. Careful planning, risk assessments, good communications, and a constant awareness of what's around you can all help to make the job safer for you and the rest of the crew. Thanks for your attention.